In 2024, the largest coffee company in China is one that once fabricated its numbers. Its 2.2 billion yuan accounting scandal was broadcast repeatedly by media outlets around the world. Its founder was kicked out of the very company he built with his own hands. On the day it was delisted, its stock price had collapsed to $1.38 cheaper than a cup of coffee. This company is called Luckin Coffee. The whole world was waiting for it to die. But it didn't. It took just 3 years to hit 34.4 billion yuan in annual revenue, open over 20,000 stores, and leave Starbucks China earnings eating its dust. Fraud. How does it bring down a global giant that never faked a thing? And after getting delisted, why does the company somehow end up thriving? The faker has fallen, so why didn't everything he built come crashing down with him? Because the founder who got kicked out of his own company came back with the exact same playbook, and this time he lost. Why? This isn't a story about a con, and it isn't a story about redemption. It's a story about the system sense. And the answer, you probably never saw it coming. Welcome to Fanco's Evolution. I'm Fanco. Today, we're diving into the story of Luckin Coffee together. April 2nd, 2020, New York. The American stock market opens for the day. Luckin Coffee's stock price came crashing down from above $26, and within just 38 minutes, it triggered 6 trading halts. On the screens of the trading floor, LK's red loss figures kept refreshing, finally locking in at over 80%. In a single day, over 30 billion yuan in market value simply vanished into thin air. On that very same day, Luckin Coffee stores across the country kept their doors open. The coffee machines were still running, baristas were still pulling shots, and customers were still scanning codes to place their orders. No one knows where this company's tomorrow lies, but right now, the corporation behind these storefronts is living through a catastrophe of total annihilation. But the story doesn't start here. Let's go back to 2005. Somewhere on an American highway, a car breaks down in the middle of nowhere. The man behind the wheel is named Lu Zhengyao. He was on a business trip in the States, scoping out opportunities, when his car broke down. So he made a call, and on the other end of the line was AAA, America's roadside assistance service. He sat on the roadside, suddenly frozen in thought. Why doesn't China have this? A team of professionals arrived quickly and resolved the problem in no time. Lu Zhengyao sat by the side of the road, and it hit him all at once. This model. Why doesn't China have anything like it? This epiphany on the American highway was what led him, upon returning home, to found the UAA, the United Automobile Association. Later, he kept walking further down that road, launching Shenzhou car rental, then Shenzhou car hailing. Every single time, it's the same logic: find the market gaps in China that America has already proven, but China hasn't caught up to yet. Born in 1969 inches, Bingnan, Fujian, Lu Zhengyao was the youngest of 5 brothers. His father brewed soy sauce for a living, and his mother once served as the party branch secretary of their village. He got into the automation department at Beijing University of Science and Technology, and from there, step by step, he made his way into the business world. But what truly helped him discover his own business logic was a car that broke down on an American highway. The year was 2008, and the financial crisis was sweeping across the globe. Shenzhou car rental had been in business for less than a year, and every single fundraising channel had run completely dry. At the moment of life and death, Lu Zhengyao's old friend, Lu Erhai of Joy Capital, rushed in with an emergency bridge loan of $10 million, pulling him through the darkest stretch of winter. That experience left an indelible mark on Lu Zhengyao. How do you fight a war without bullets? From that moment on, this phrase never left his lips, and 10 years later, It would become the war philosophy he carried into battle for the coffee market. In 2010, Legend Holdings injected 1.2 billion yuan into the company, at the cost of Lu Zhengyao being heavily diluted into a minority shareholder. But the very first thing he did with that money was spend 600 million on new vehicles, expanding his fleet from a few thousand cars to 50,000. Then he launched a price war the industry had never seen before. Rental rates slashed by 30 to 50%. His competitors couldn't afford to bleed. He could. This same logic was later replicated in its entirety in Luckin Coffee's subsidy wars. In fact, before officially entering the coffee track, Lu Zhengyao conducted far more extensive field research than most people could ever imagine. He spent weeks on end, every single morning, staking out the ground floors of office buildings across different districts of Beijing, with his team personally, counting every person who walked in and out of Starbucks. Record peak hours and wait times. He pulled coffee consumption heat maps of major cities across the country from food delivery platforms, overlaid them with GIS geographic data, and zeroed in on the areas with the highest concentration of white-collar workers, yet had the least coffee coverage of all. He stumbled upon a structural contradiction that got his blood pumping. The density of white-collar workers crammed into mid- to low-end office buildings in Tier 1 cities far outstripped what Starbucks could ever hope to cover. Starbucks built its empire on a simple formula: prime locations, ground floor of busy commercial districts, premium pricing, which told a very clear story. There was a massive pool of middle-income white-collar workers out there, craving their daily coffee fix, yet nobody was really serving them right. The Chinese coffee market isn't too small, it just doesn't have enough doors to walk through. That's what Lu Zhengyao said at an internal meeting. His approach to solving the problem was to multiply the entry points: more locations, lower prices, easier mobile ordering, transforming an occasional treat into a daily habit. This judgment was correct. He simply used the wrong financial means to accelerate it. But actually, he's extremely meticulous and detail-oriented inside. This contrast right here, it cuts to the heart of who Lu Zhengyao really is. He looks like a street boss, but thinks like a chess grandmaster. And that tension between his rough exterior and his razor-sharp mind, that's exactly what makes him so dangerous and so fascinating. He's actually quite the opposite: meticulous, good with numbers, like an old landlord keeping his books. A classic case of rough on the outside, sharp as a tack on the inside. 2017. Another person walked out of his office. She goes by Qian Jia, born in Wuhan in 1976, a graduate of Wuhan Textile University. And in 2004, she made her way to Beijing, starting from the very bottom as an administrative assistant. For 10 years, she gave everything to Shenzhou Yukar, climbing all the way to COO. The media called her a real-life doulala. And then one day, she decided to walk away. But before she left, she had quietly done something. Inside the headquarters building of Yukar Incorporated, she had discreetly opened Luckin Coffee's very first test store, Store No. 001. That was October 2017, just over a month before she formally submitted her resignation. On November 8, 2017, she officially left. When that evening came, she posted on her moments bidding farewell to Shenzhou and announcing that she was joining Luckin Coffee. Left behind a farewell that would be quoted again and again in the years to come. When this message was sent, Luckin Coffee had no trademark, no formal team, no funding. The brand name hadn't even been officially registered yet. But behind Qian Jia stood someone even more reckless than her, Lu Zhengyao. Lu Zhengyao didn't drink coffee. What he drank was capital. He zeroed in on the coffee market for a reason so simple it's almost unsettling. The average Chinese person drinks fewer than 5 cups of coffee a year, while Americans put away 380. The gap is the profit, and the scale is the barrier. In his pitch deck to investors, position Luckin as a combination of 4 companies: Starbucks for premium coffee, 7-Eleven for its dense store network, Costco for consistently low prices, and Amazon for being tech-driven. In my lane, the Luckin lane, I times am times Luckin. No one can touch me. Lu Zhengyao said that with complete sincerity. At first, the world just laughed. But soon, the mockery turned to astonishment. During that period, Luckin's approach to customer acquisition nearly shattered everything people thought they knew about brand building. It skips the offline ads, the launch events, the emotional branding. It does just one thing: hands you a free cup of coffee. Sign up and get one free, refer a friend and get another, buy 2 and get 1 on the house. This fission mechanism looked dirt cheap and unsophisticated at the time, but the data validated its power. In 2018, Luckin Coffee sold approximately 90 million cups of coffee and beverages throughout the year, serving a cumulative customer base of over 12 million. The cost of acquiring a single user through promotions was rapidly compressed from over 10 yuan in the early days down to roughly 7 yuan, a textbook-level efficiency figure by any standard in the consumer goods space. While traditional coffee brands were still debating store ambiance and brand storytelling, Luckin Coffee had already been pulling customers into its own private domain in the most direct way possible. In October 2017, Luckin Coffee opened its first trial store in Beijing. What happened next can no longer be described with just the word fast. Series A, $200 million. Series B, another $200 million. Series B, plus an additional $150 million. BlackRock, Hillhouse Capital, Joy Capital, GIC, the world's most elite investors lining up to place their bets. By the end of 2018, Luckin Coffee had already opened 2,073 locations. By May 17, 2019, Luckin Coffee landed on Nasdaq, becoming the largest Asian company by IPO fundraising size in the US that year, raising $561 million. From the very first pilot store to IPO, roughly 18 months. 18 months. A speed unprecedented in the entire history of the global coffee industry. Starbucks took 21 years to go public, while Luckin Coffee rang the Nasdaq bell in under 2. Behind all that speed, there's one small but satisfying victory worth noting. Luckin Coffee had barely been around for half a year when it forced Starbucks, yes, that time Starbucks, to finally start doing delivery. Starbucks spent its first 2 decades in China refusing to touch the delivery model. But in 2018, under pressure from Luckin Coffee, it was forced into a partnership with Alibaba, scrambling to integrate with LA, Me, and Taobao, desperately launching its own food delivery service. A tiny startup, barely off the ground, forced a global giant to abandon a strategy it had held for 20 years. That same year, Luckin pulled another move that left people scratching their heads. They launched an independent milk tea brand called Xiaolu Tea and signed Xiao Zhan, one of the hottest celebrity idols at the time, as their spokesperson, diving headfirst into the freshly made tea beverage market. To many observers, this looked like a coffee company having a full-blown anxiety attack, moving too fast, pulling in too many directions, firing the gun before the bullet was even loaded. But there's another way to read this. Lu Zhengyao never intended to just sell a cup of coffee. What he was really building was a digital infrastructure that could cover every single on-the-go consumption scenario imaginable. Coffee, milk, tea, they're just the entry point. The system itself is the real goal. During all this time, nobody thought to ask the most fundamental question. Were people actually drinking coffee in all these stores they'd burned through their cash to open? Or more precisely, someone did ask, but no one wanted to listen. Behind the location of every single Luckin Coffee store, there's an algorithm at work. This is the digital system Luckin began building from its earliest days, one that never relied on traditional intuition for site selection, and instead, it analyzes the heat maps of food delivery platforms and the pedestrian flow data from GIS geographic information systems, letting the system recommend the optimal location. The tools themselves are not the problem. The problem is what drives them, not the patience of stewardship, but the hunger of capital. By the end of 2019, Luckin Coffee had over 4,500 locations across China. In public appearance after public appearance, Lu Zhengyao hammered home a single ambition: to dethrone Starbucks. But at this very moment, the numbers behind those 4,500 stores are being quietly rewritten by an invisible hand. Speed is a weapon, but weapons have a way of turning on their wielder. And the first shot of the backlash was fired from across the ocean by an institution notorious for short selling. At the end of January 2020, a single email was sent to Carson Block, the founder of Muddy Waters Research. A new generation of Chinese fraud. A new generation of Chinese fraud too has emerged. An email attachment, an anonymous report, 89 pages long. The author is Snow Lake Capital, a Beijing-based hedge fund. Shuihu Capital's founder, Ma Ziqiang, spent at least 6 months leading his team in a covert investigation into Luckin Coffee. He sent the report to multiple institutions simultaneously, but only Muddy Waters chose to step up and put their name behind it. "We were confident the report was pointing in the right direction," Carson Block later said, "and we believed we could serve as the platform to get it out there." Muddy Waters is the name that strikes the most fear into Chinese stocks on Wall Street. It does one thing and one thing only: find the cracks in public companies' financial data, short them, and blow the whistle. 2011, shorting Sino-Forest. 2016, shorting China Huishan Dairy. Every move he made almost spelled the end of a company. But this report on Luckin Coffee was unprecedented even by Muddy Waters standards. Behind that 8-9-page document stands an investigative force of over 1,500 people, 92 full-time investigators, and 1,418 part-time personnel. They staked out 620 Luckin Coffee locations across China, logging a cumulative 981 days of surveillance. They manually collected 25,843 receipts, verifying each transaction one by one. They set up surveillance cameras to capture over 11,260 hours of raw in-store footage, which they then cross-referenced against the daily order numbers that Luckin Coffee had publicly disclosed. The conclusion comes down to 4 words: the numbers were fabricated. Luckin Coffee's per-store daily sales volume for the third quarter of 2019 had been inflated by at least 69%. The day the report dropped, Luckin stock only fell about 10%. Then, within 2 days, it had completely bounced back to where it was before the report came out. No one believed the short sellers. And what made it even more jaw-dropping was this. After the report came out, Luckin actually went ahead and closed an $865 million follow-on offering. Rui Xin, Morgan Stanley, CICC, and the auditing firm Ernst & Young, all of them either participated in or signed off on this deal. At that moment, nearly the entire financial world was vouching for Luckin. This was the fraudsters' most precarious and most glorious hour, accused to their face, yet chosen to be believed by the market. But this stroke of luck only lasted 2 months. So where did the money actually come from? Later, investigators reconstructed the complete closed loop. Luckin funneled money to affiliated suppliers under the guise of procurement payments. The affiliated supplier transferred funds to the affiliated B2B client, and the affiliated B2B client then remitted the money back to Luckin Coffee under the guise of purchasing coffee vouchers. This isn't just fabricated revenue, even the costs were made up. The entire financial statement was a complete, self-contained business loop, a fictional one, from top to bottom. The investigators also uncovered another telling detail. The system's order numbers showed gaps jumping, for instance, directly from 271 to 273. The 272 inches the middle is a phantom order inserted out of thin air. The beauty of order skipping lies in this. It never generates any physical paperwork, leaving outside investigators with nothing to get their hands on. 3 days before Luckin Coffee's self-exposure, on March 31, 2020, something unusual appeared in the U.S. options market. An abnormally large, bearish position. The trading volume that day far exceeded normal levels. After the bombshell dropped, those options holders walked away with returns dozens of times over their initial investment. Who was pulling the strings? That question still has no answer. The SEC once reached out to Swiss financial regulators for help with the investigation, but whatever they found, it never saw the light of day. 4 mounting pressures made it impossible for the fraudsters to keep up the charade. An independent audit committee had obtained detailed transaction data. Ernst & Young refused to sign off on the financial statements. Multiple law firms have already filed class action lawsuits. The Luckin Coffee shares that Lu Zhengyao had pledged were now facing a forced liquidation as the stock price collapsed, and with that, he had lost any financial reason to keep buying time. On the morning of April 2, 2020, before the markets opened, Luckin Coffee released an announcement. COO Liu Jian and his subordinates had fabricated approximately 2.2 billion yuan in sales. The news sent shockwaves through the market. Fabricated approximately 2.2 billion RMB in total transaction volume across the second through fourth quarters of 2019. The word self-exposed, it was used over and over again that day. But this wasn't a moment of conscience. It was something far more calculated than simply getting caught. Under U.S. securities law, voluntary disclosure can significantly reduce penalties. But the capital markets accept no excuses. 38 minutes into trading, 6 circuit breakers triggered. In a single day, the stock price plummeted from $26 to under 5, wiping out more than 30 billion yuan in market value, just like that. Right on the heels of that, Nasdaq fired off 2 delisting notices, the first on May 15th, the second on June 17th. This time, Lu Zhengyao didn't fight back. June 24th, 2020. Luckin Coffee withdrew its appeal for a hearing and accepted its delisting. 5 days later, on June 29th, the ticker symbol LK vanished from the Nasdaq for good. The stock price at delisting was $1.38. 3 days after the self-exposure, Lu Zhengyao posted on WeChat Moments expressing remorse. No explanation, no justification, just that. In the days that followed, Luckin Coffee stores across the country kept their doors open. The coffee machine is still running. The barista is still making coffee. The delivery rider is still out on his rounds. But at the checkout counters of some stores, customers have started whispering among themselves, how much longer can this company hold on? No one knew the answer, but many people still scanned the code and placed their orders. In a way, it was precisely these ordinary consumers, unaware, yet never absent, who, during that vacuum of uncertainty, unwittingly kept a company's last breath alive. Beyond all the grand narratives, the most overlooked figures during that period were the tens of thousands of ordinary employees across the country. April 2nd, 2020. For most Luckin Coffee employees, they found out their company had blown the whistle on itself for fraud, the same way everyone else did, scrolling through trending topics on their phones. Their first instinct was to open the work chat group, waiting for word from headquarters. The notice came quickly. Stores would remain open as usual, and staff were not to make any public statements. No one knew how much longer this job would last. In the days that followed, quite a few people quietly updated their resumes. But then there were those who chose to stay and wait, not entirely sure what they were waiting for, only knowing that customers still walked through the door each day, the coffee machine still hummed, everything wasn't over yet. Surprisingly, during those weeks when the crisis was at its most severe, the store's average daily sales didn't plummet off a cliff the way everyone had expected. Customers still come to buy coffee. Some even make a special trip just to show their support. At a company's most vulnerable moment, it was the most ordinary employees and customers who, with the lightest of gestures, held up the heaviest of things. $2.2 billion in fabricated revenues, and what did they get in return? A $180 million fine from the SEC, the largest ever handed down in the history of Chinese stocks listed in the United States. Along with the subsequent debt restructuring, the total amount Luckin ultimately had to repay exceeded $1.65 billion. Since there is no extradition treaty between China and the United States, and all three key individuals remain on Chinese soil, the U.S. Department of Justice has no real way to get its hands on them. A criminal prosecution that, to this day, has yet to land on any individual. But here lies a deeply ironic truth. In those 3 years of fraud, Lu Zhengyao did accomplish one genuine thing. He built a digitized system. Location algorithms, delivery scheduling, user profiling, staff rostering, none of this is make-believe. It all runs for real, serving real customers in the real world. Yang Fei, Luckin Coffee's chief growth officer, once said something in a 2019 speech that really stuck with me. The essence of new retail is using digital technology to empower people, products, and places. When those words were first spoken, they sounded like a vision. But by April 2020, they had become an irony. People who empower themselves with numbers also lie with numbers. Only this time, when the lie collapses, the system remains standing. The edifice has fallen. Nothing but ashes as far as the eye can see. Who's going to take over this wreckage? Who would dare walk back into a company the entire world had written off as a scam and pour themselves a fresh cup of coffee? The person who picked up that baton, possibly someone whose name most people have never heard. His name is Guo Jinyi, born in 1981 in Chifeng, Inner Mongolia. A PhD in transportation planning and management from Beijing Jiaotong University, earned at just 28 years old, followed by a position at the Ministry of Transport as a civil servant, the ultimate iron rice bowl. 35 years old, he walked away from an iron rice bowl and made the leap into Car Incorporated, and that's how he first stepped into the Luckin orbit. He once introduced himself at CEIBS, reading out the meaning behind his name, Guo Jin Yi Jin, as in choosing your words with care, E, as in being the same person, inside and out. Those 8 words were later proven true, one by one, through a series of concrete actions he took. Before May 2020, if you'd asked anyone inside Luckin Coffee who is Guo Jinjin, most people would have told you. Engineering background, man of few words, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, and whenever there's a meeting, he always gravitates to a corner of the room. He joined Luckin in 2017, working through fundraising rounds and overseeing operations, yet under the towering shadow of Lu Zhengyao and Qian Ziya. He was virtually invisible to the public eye. Yet it was precisely this man, the one who barely seemed to exist, who was appointed acting CEO on May 12, 2020, and then formally took the helm as CEO that July. Pushing him to the top wasn't glory, it was a disaster left to clean up. Lu Zhengyao had been kicked off the board. Qian Jia had been suspended pending investigation. The executives directly involved in the fraud, Lu Jian, and the rest were all gone. SEC inquiry letters kept coming, one after another, while class action lawsuit notices piled up on the legal department's desks. The stores were still open, employees still showing up for work, but the entire management layer of the company had been blown apart, like a bomb had gone off right in the middle of it. Everything above was just gone. The very first day Guo Jingyi took the helm, he wasn't facing outside competitors, he was facing his own people. 24 senior executives had signed a letter, jointly demanding his resignation. They never believed this unassuming young man had what it takes to steer a company caught dead center in a global storm of public scrutiny. They wanted someone with more prestige, more resources, to come in and clean up the mess. But Guo Jingyi didn't leave. He did something that went completely against the grain. He voluntarily requested an independent investigation into himself to determine whether he had committed any wrongdoing. 1 month later, the investigation concluded. No evidence was found to substantiate any wrongdoing on Guo Jingyi's part. The board stood behind him. The coup had failed. After steadying things on the inside, the next question Guo Jingyi had to face was, how do you get your employees to believe in this company again? He established one core management principle: let the data speak, and let the data be transparent. From the moment he officially took the helm as CEO in July 2020, he began holding regular remote meetings with regional operations teams across the country. These meetings weren't about motivational slogans, they were about laying out that week's financial data, store-by-store profit and loss reports, and updates on the debt restructuring process, synchronized simultaneously to every single participant in the meeting. That level of information transparency was, in the management culture of Chinese enterprises at the time, almost unheard of. If the company asks its employees to stay, it should let them know why they're staying. That's what Guo Jingyi said at a regional management meeting. He had another habit, personally visiting the regions with the worst performance. He didn't sit back at headquarters waiting for reports to come in. Instead, he flew directly to the scene, walked into the stores himself, and sat down with the local teams to go through every single issue, one by one. Was it the product mix, the wrong location choices, still in operations execution? This style is nothing like Lu Zhengyao. Lu was a chess master, always thinking 10 moves ahead, moving fast and getting out faster. Guo is more like an engineer, laying brick by brick until the whole wall holds against the wind. Some people compare him to Lu Zhengyao, saying one runs on sheer force of presence, the other runs on numbers. Guo Jingyi's logic has always been this: don't chase a win blindly first. Make sure you don't lose. Because not losing, in and of itself, is already a form of winning. A group of mid-level managers who had already made up their minds to leave once they saw the quarterly numbers starting to turn around, one by one, they chose to stay. This time, the turnaround came with no parachuted-in celebrity executives, no grand declarations of revival, just a CEO who thinks like an engineer, and a system that hadn't yet collapsed. But Lu Zhenggao's threat was far from over. In October 2021, Guo Jingyi introduced a poison pill plan to prevent potential hostile acquirers from reclaiming control of management. This December of the same year, an extraordinary shareholders' meeting passed a resolution prohibiting the transfer of shares to any restricted persons. This legal floodgate completely shut the door on Lu Zhengyao's path back. Later, in a rare public appearance, Guo Jingyi said something that stuck with me. Luckin is like my own child. I just can't let it go. He also said something else calmer and far more final. Every quarter, we review the list of people we will never hire. He made sure the company had truly achieved a thorough purge of the fraudulent forces. The first thing he did was stop the bleeding. Around 609 stores were shut down, mainly focusing on locations that had overexpanded and been bleeding money for years. This was a calculated retreat, not a panicked one. The second thing, he did pay off the debts. The 16th of December, 2020, Luckin Coffee reached a settlement with the SEC, agreeing to pay a fine of $180 million. Right on the heels of that came an even more massive debt restructuring plan, one that brought together creditors and investment institutions both domestic and overseas, with total repayments ultimately exceeding $1.65 billion. The third task was a blood transfusion. Lu Zhengyao's influence over Luckin had to be completely purged. In April 2021, Dazan Capital led $240 million. This isn't a bet on Luckin's coffee. This is a bet on the man behind it, Guo Jingyi. January 27, 2022. Primavera Capital, together with IDG Capital, completed a pivotal equity acquisition. After acquiring all Class A ordinary shares held by Lu Zhengyao and other former management, Dacheng Capital's stake exceeded 30% upon completion of the deal, with voting rights surpassing 50%. From this moment on, Lu Zhengyao and Luckin Coffee part ways for good. In April 2022, after completing its financial debt restructuring, Guo Jingyi wrote in an announcement, "Today marks a new beginning for Luckin Coffee." Beyond keeping its original name, Luckin Coffee is essentially a brand new company. A company whose founder personally injected the gene of deception into its very DNA, took nearly 2 years to finally root that gene out from within itself. But amid all these moves to stop the bleeding, pay off debts, and transfuse new blood into the company, Guo Jingyi made a decision that many people at the time simply couldn't wrap their heads around. In the context of company-wide massive layoffs, he chose to spare the digital team. Those systems built back in Lu Zhengyao's era, user profiling, store location analytics, intelligent scheduling, delivery dispatch, they're still running. 3 months after the accounting fraud came to light, Luckin Coffee had quietly built up a private domain user base of 1.8 million people through WeCom, and they did it fast. Those customers who kept placing orders even in the midst of a crisis, they were being quietly held in place by an invisible system. Guo Jingyi saw that number. He understood that the most valuable thing Luckin Coffee held in its hands wasn't the leases on over 4,000 stores, nor the cash that hadn't yet been burned through, and this system itself. And behind the system, those real, living people who are still willing to buy you a cup of coffee. The rubble has been cleared. The tools remain. Guo Jingyi would later sum up the principles that guided him through that period. Stop the bleeding fast. Stay laser-focused on operations. Don't burn cash. Don't expand. This stands in stark contrast to Lu Zhengyao's philosophy of how can you fight without bullets. He channeled every resource into one single thing, working with the stores he already had and the systems already in place to make sure every single cup of coffee that was actually being sold was sold right. The revenue numbers started speaking for themselves. In 2019, Luckin Coffee pulled in 3.03 billion yuan for the full year, 2020. The very year the fraud was exposed, revenue actually climbed to 4.03 billion yuan because the stores were still there, the customers were still there, the system was still there. In 2021, as Guo Jingyi's series of reform measures gradually took effect, revenue nearly doubled, reaching 7.97 billion yuan. By 2022, It had reached 13.29 billion yuan, another 67% surge. This revenue curve stands as one of the most extraordinary comeback stories in the entire history of world commerce. A company that nearly drowned in its own deception the very year it was swept out the door, its revenue was still climbing. Through those dark days of delisting and disgrace, its stores were still turning a profit. In the process of paying off his debts, the system kept on growing. What he needed now was no longer a savior, but a cup of coffee genuinely worth paying for. A cup of coffee that could prove this company was still worth staying alive for. In September 2020, less than 3 months after Luckin Coffee was delisted, a new drink quietly appeared on the menu. It was called the thick milk latte. No one thought of it as something that could save a life. The outside world was still fixated on court filings and SEC subpoenas. Nobody cared what new products Luckin Coffee was putting out. But the data speaks for itself. In the first 9 days after thick milk latte launched, it was selling an average of 300,000 cups every single day. And within just 4 months, cumulative sales blew past 31.6 million cups. This product has gone through 11 rounds of internal blind testing. Its success is no accident. It's the first signal from a system that's been quietly coming alive, now making itself known to the outside world for the very first time. Yet, that was merely the prequel. On April 12, 2021, another product launched. Its name, the Fresh Coconut Latte. Then, it sold out in a single second. Not just one store in one city, it was a nationwide wipeout. Social media feeds flipped overnight from, "Wait, Luckin Coffee is still a thing?" to, "Someone please help me snag a coconut latte." Consumers are posting their failed restocking screenshots on Xiaohongshu, and the comment section is flooded with the same 4 words: "Please, please, restock." This wasn't some calculated scarcity tactic cooked up by a marketing team. Luckin Coffee itself never saw it coming. "We honestly didn't see it coming," admitted Joe Viming, the product manager behind it all. "None of us predicted that the coconut latte would blow up the way it did. We can guarantee that the logic behind this product is sound. It aligns with the preferences of most people. All we can do is increase the odds of these products becoming best sellers." Didn't see it coming doesn't mean wasn't ready for it. The birth of this cup of coffee can be traced back 2 years ago. In April 2019, at the Shanghai Hotel Supplies Expo, a small Hainan company called Yekyu showed up with a cold-pressed coconut milk product. He poured nearly 1 million yuan into a experimental store in Sanya, a place built entirely around one obsession: testing every possible way coconut and coffee could come together. The test ended, and he shut it all down. He reached out to Luckin Coffee's procurement team and pitched a partnership. But that year, Luckin was caught up in its IPO and its fraud, so the collaboration was put on hold. But they never completely cut ties. For 2 years, the R&D teams at COTTI and Luckin Coffee kept wrestling with one question: how do you bring coconut and coffee together so it doesn't feel like 2 things just forced into the same cup? The answer is 43 rounds of formula adjustments. 43 rounds. Each one required tweaking the concentration of coconut milk, the extraction parameters of the coffee, and the blending temperature of the two. Was the direction they ultimately settled on. Coming from what seems like a simple insight: most Chinese consumers don't enjoy the bitter taste of coffee, especially younger users who are making the switch from milk tea to milk-based coffee drinks. They've grown used to sweetness, and they resist the bitter. So, strip away the bitterness. Let the coconut's natural sweetness take center stage, while the coffee quietly steps back, doing its job of keeping you awake. This isn't a flash of genius. This is a conclusion that was forced out by data. And behind that conclusion there's a much bigger insight into the category itself. 2017 to 2021 marked an era of explosive growth in China's new-style tea beverage market. Hei tea, Nayuki's tea, Cha Yan, Yue Se, fed an entire generation of young consumers on thick cream and high sugar, shaping their taste for sweet drinks from the ground up. By 2021, China's fresh-made tea beverage market had surpassed 100 billion yuan in annual sales. The primary consumer base consists of female white-collar workers between the ages of 18 and 30, and, as it happens, this is precisely the demographic that Luckin Coffee has been most eager to win over. The thing is, these people don't drink coffee. Not because they don't want to, but because coffee is too bitter. The data team at Luckin Coffee discovered through user research that bitter taste is the #1 reason why non-coffee drinkers refuse to drink coffee. These users don't need to be taught how to drink coffee. What they need is a coffee that isn't so bitter. By doing so, the direction for the coconut latte recipe became clear. Bring that sweet coconut flavor front and center. Push the bitterness of coffee below the threshold of perception. Make it feel like a milk tea built on a coffee base, rather than an Americano that happens to have milk in it. This isn't compromise, it's a deliberate redrawing of category boundaries. After the product launched, a significant portion of the new users were women who hadn't previously drunk coffee but were regular milk tea drinkers. In other words, the coconut latte wasn't just competing for a slice of the coffee market, it was pulling bubble tea drinkers into the coffee world and bringing them over in droves. This will have a profound and far-reaching impact on the long-term penetration of the entire Chinese coffee industry. And what forced this conclusion to light was an R&D system operating deep within Luckin Coffee, one that the outside world knew almost nothing about. Luckin Coffee's product development department has been split into 5 separate teams: product analysis, menu management, product R&D, product testing, and product optimization. The product analysis team digs into the underlying logic behind existing hits, identifying emerging flavor trends. The menu management team plans new product launches 6 to 8 months in advance, ensuring a continuous pipeline of offerings across every tier. Multiple R&D teams run in parallel, a classic horse race setup where several groups tackle the same product category at once, each coming up with their own solution. The testing team handles consumer research, internal blind tastings, and city-level pilot rollouts, while the optimization team makes sure every product lines up with the standard operating procedures across all store locations. 5 teams don't operate like an assembly line passing the baton, they run in parallel. Every month, this system internally tests over 50 new products. Only 1 or 2 will make it out alive. We don't use words like fragrant or sweet to describe flavor. We replace all of that with numbers. This way, when developing products later on, they can trace back to the original ingredients through those numbers, turning taste into data, turning experience into algorithms. Each ingredient's flavor is broken down into multiple dimensions. Take peach as an example. Its aroma, tartness, and sweetness, with each dimension assigned a quantified value, form a flavor coordinate map. During the testing phase, 50 to 60 carefully selected internal, high-palate employees conducted blind taste tests. Scoring was divided into 2 categories: flavor dimensions, sweetness, acidity, thick, full-bodied, viscous, harmonious, balanced, and silky smooth. All the scores are compiled into a radar chart, and that chart alone decides the fate of a product, whether it lives or dies. Before the Velvet Latte ever hit the menu, it went through 23 internal concepts and 56 rounds of flavor testing. The thick milk latte, 11 rounds of blind tasting. Coconut latte, the result of 43 rounds of recipe refinement. No single person's palate was calling the shots. It was a system making the call. In 2021 alone, Luckin Coffee launched 113 new products. That's roughly one new item hitting the shelves every 3 days. During that same period, Starbucks wasn't even close to keeping up with that pace. And Luckin Coffee's extreme R&D cycle from user insight to product launch can be as fast as just 46 days. The explosive success of the raw coconut latte proved just how powerful this system had become. On May 31st, the raw coconut series hit a single-day peak of over 420,000 cups sold. June 30th single-month sales broke through 10 million cups, shattering every record Luckin had ever set for a new product launch. By April 6, 2022, exactly 1 year after the coconut latte launched, Luckin Coffee announced that single-item sales had broken through 100 million cups. 100 million cups. A single product, 1 year, but more than just a bestseller, it saved an entire company's balance sheet. In the third quarter of 2021, Luckin Coffee turned profitable for the first time on a quarterly basis, under non-GAAP metrics. 2022 saw a complete turnaround to profitability across all store operations. March 2nd, 2023, Guo Jinyi made it official. For the full year of 2022, Luckin Coffee had turned its operating profit positive, clocking in at 1.16 billion yuan. We can't guarantee that any given product will be a massive hit, Zhou Weiming said. But what we can guarantee is that the logic behind the product is sound. What this really means is, a viral hit isn't something you gamble your way into. It's something you calculate your way into. But a single cup of raw coconut latte still isn't enough to answer that most fundamental question. It proves that Luckin Coffee can still make a great product, but it doesn't prove that Luckin can win consistently or win by design. After one life-saving cup of coffee, what Luckin needs is no longer another hit product, but a machine that can continuously times produce, times hit products. An invisible digital empire. And this empire had, in truth, been operating in the shadows all along. To understand this empire, we need to start with a cup of sauce-flavored latte. On September 4th, 2023, Luckin Coffee announced a strategic partnership with Queiqiao Mutai. This was already a headline in the making. China's youngest coffee brand and China's oldest baijiu brand teaming up to make a single cup of coffee. But what truly stunned the industry was the execution details behind it all. Mutai dispatched a dedicated team to personally escort 30 million yuan worth of 5.3 proof Fei Tian Mutai liquor, delivering it straight to the factory gates of Ningxia's Seizhan Dairy. Every single bottle of Mutai, from the moment it's cracked open, to the ingredients being poured in, to the final production of that rich, creamy Mutai-flavored milk tea, the entire process is carried out under on-site supervision by the Mutai team themselves. After production wraps, the empty bottles get collected and hauled away. So why would a collaboration partner at this level choose Luckin Coffee? The answer isn't the brand. It isn't sentiment. It's the system. Luckin Coffee has an internal co-branding decision-making framework that categorizes potential partners into 6 distinct tiers based on their capacity for resource exchange. The core dimension of decision-making isn't how well known is this brand. It's how much do the user profiles of both parties actually overlap. The analysis of 680 million user behavior tags led the system to predict that the Mutai collaboration could precisely reach the business demographic where Luckin had been relatively underrepresented, and, as it turned out, this collaboration genuinely brought Luckin Coffee access to over 460,000 business customer profiles. The subsequent Ultraman collaboration, the system had predicted with precision that it would attract Gen Z male users, and sure enough, after launch, this demographics share within Luckin Coffee's customer base jumped by a full 19%. The result of the sauce-flavored latte was this: 5.42 million cups sold on its very first day, with single-day sales breaking through the 100 million yuan mark. In fact, Luckin's internal decision-making speed far exceeds the industry average. Taking the Velvet Latte as an example, from concept to launch it only took about 2 weeks. Only 12 hours, and the intelligent product selection system's prediction accuracy for new product success rates has already surpassed 83%. But the sauce lot is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, One System, a name coined by Luckin Coffee's Chief Operating Officer, Cao Wenbao, a systematic management framework covering the full life cycle of every single store. Cao Wenbao described it. Through front-end interaction, operations, and data analytics systems, we built a platform covering store site selection, full store operations lifecycle, talent development, and other functions, all under the One System unified management, achieving full digitization. It's simple to operate, and data is visualized. So, what exactly does it manage? First and foremost, it manages scheduling. At Luckin, scheduling isn't left to the store manager's gut feeling. The system draws on over a dozen dimensions: historical sales data, weather forecasts, nearby business district activity, seasonal variables, and more to predict the hourly customer traffic for each store 1 day in advance, and automatically generates staff scheduling tables. When things get really clever is with the dynamic order splitting mechanism. The moment any single store finds itself suddenly buried under a backlog of pending orders, the system detects in real time and automatically reroutes some orders to nearby stores with lighter workloads. When there aren't enough delivery riders, the system directly dispatches more riders to that area. Next up, managing orders. Every single store, how much milk to stock, how many coffee beans, how many cup lids, none of that is left to the guesswork of store employees. Relying on the system to automatically generate order quantities based on recent sales curves, the ingredients have hit their expiration date, the system automatically triggers an alert, and employees are required to dispose of them within the visible range of the surveillance cameras. Then there's the equipment to manage. Every single espresso machine across more than 20,000 locations nationwide is connected to the Internet of Things. The extraction flow rate, water temperature, and pressure of every single cup uploaded to the backend in real time. If several consecutive cups show parameters drifting outside standard values, the system automatically triggers an alert and pushes a notification to the nearest maintenance engineer. Not even the refrigerators are spared. The quality control team doesn't need to set foot in a single store. From the back end, they can monitor the 24-hour temperature curves of every refrigerator in every location across the entire country. What about compliance management? If an employee's health certificate expires, the system automatically locks out their scheduling permissions. No one needs to manually check a thing. And what does that mean? It means that a brand new store manager who's only been on the job for 3 days and a veteran manager who's put in 10 years in the eyes of Luckin's system, they're practically interchangeable. The biggest bottleneck in traditional coffee chains, the number of qualified store managers, has been systematically eliminated at Luckin Coffee. When competitors were still scratching their heads over how to develop a great store manager, Luckin had already transformed store managers from decision makers into executors of the system. In June 2022, Luckin Coffee quietly achieved another technical milestone, almost unknown to the outside world: the hybrid dual cloud project. This engineering feat, spanning 5 quarters, empowered Luckin Coffee's technical architecture to handle 5 million orders a day, with the capacity to scale all the way up to tens of millions. This isn't the kind of technological arsenal you'd expect from a coffee company, but Luckin has it. And on the other side of that system, invisible to consumers, another battle is being fought: the supply chain. In 2021, Luckin Coffee launched its first self-built roasting facility in Pingnan, Fujian, with an annual production capacity of 15,000 tons. In April 2024, the second production base went into operation at the Kunshan Comprehensive Bonded Zone, Jiangsu, with an investment of $120 million, an annual production capacity of 30,000 metric tons, nearly 20% of the nation's total coffee roasting output, making it the single largest operational coffee roasting facility in the country. 2 new production bases are also under construction in Qingdao and Xiamen, each with a planned annual capacity of 55,000 tons. After all 4 bases are fully operational, Luckin's in-house roasting capacity will exceed 150,000 metric tons, enough to supply a nationwide network of over 20,000 stores. At the same time, in November 2024, Luckin signed a procurement contract that turned heads across the industry, a 5-year agreement with Brazilian coffee bean suppliers, a procurement agreement totaling 240,000 metric tons, valued at 10 billion yuan, the largest single purchase order in Luckin Coffee's history. Luckin accounts for approximately 60% of Brazil's total coffee bean exports to China. It means Luckin is no longer just a buyer, and not just any player, one with the power to lock down supply across global production regions. The strategic significance of this move goes far beyond simply cutting procurement costs. In the global coffee chain industry, fluctuations in raw material prices represent one of the biggest variables affecting profit margins. From 2021 to 2023, driven by frost damage in Brazilian growing regions and a sharp spike in global shipping costs, green coffee bean futures surged by more than 60% at their peak. Rattled by this pressure, Starbucks raised prices on its core products in China twice, once in late 2021 and again in early 2022, hiking them by 1 to 2 yuan each time. Yet by 2023, with budget rivals like Luckin Coffee aggressively closing in, Starbucks was forced to reverse course, and average transaction values began to slip. The price hike was eventually reversed under pressure. Luckin, on the other hand, thanks to supply contracts locked in ahead of time and its own in-house roasting capacity, never raised prices on its core products. It's not that it doesn't care about profits, it's that it locked down the biggest variable of all, raw material costs, well in advance, through long-term contracts and its own in-house roasting capacity. When COTTI launched its 9.9 yuan price war in 2023, the world's first reaction was, can Luckin Coffee hold on? Looking back, Luckin didn't just survive, it actually proved its cost competitiveness in the thick of hand-to-hand combat. A person who can keep costs locked down is the one who truly has the confidence to fight a price war. Those competitors without a supply chain firewall, once they get dragged into a race to the bottom on price, they have nothing left to fall back on but squeezing their own margins dry. The mass losses suffered by COTTI franchisees are, to a considerable extent, the direct consequence of exactly this kind of logic. Yang Fei once said something that stuck with me. Only when your character and your luck move as one can you truly open up the flow. Put it in plain English, a brand isn't built by running ads, it's grown through a system. In 2018, Luckin Coffee's marketing expenses accounted for 88.81% of its total revenue. By 2021, that number had dropped to just 4.23%. Not because Luckin stopped doing marketing, but because the system has taken over marketing itself. Over 30,000 enterprise WeChat store groups, 100 million private domain users they can reach directly, anytime, over 1,000 user profile tags, and more than 5,000 dynamic coupon combinations generated by factoring in weather conditions, geographic location, every coupon, who gets it, when it arrives, how much it's worth, none of that is decided by a human being. The data speaks for itself. After users join the group, their average monthly purchase frequency increases by 30%, weekly repurchase numbers go up by 28%, and monthly active users rise by around 10%. Behind these numbers lies a complete user retention flywheel, spinning quietly without a single dollar spent on advertising. All of this, taken together, is what forms Luckin Coffee's true moat. It's not standing at the entrance of any single store. It lives inside every coffee machine's sensor, inside every auto-generated shift schedule, in every piece of labeled user behavior data. But the moat has been built, the battle's far from over. Because there is someone, the person Rushin knows better than anyone, who is leading a brand new army cutting straight toward him from the other side. That man was Lu Zhengyao. In 2022, after being completely ousted from Luckin Coffee, Lu Zhengyao founded COTTI Coffee. If Ruisheng's comeback is a story about systems, then COTTI is its sequel, a story about speed. Same script, same director. Let's a COTTI, let's a COTTI. But this time, the audience had already seen season 1. Luckin's playbook was simple and brutal. 9.9 yuan, all day, unlimited. In February 2023, COTTI Coffee launched its 100 Cities, 1,000 Stores Coffee Festival, offering 9.9 yuan, 8.8 yuan, 4.8 yuan, or even coffee for 1 yuan. Every single one of these numbers hits like a blade, driving straight into Luckin's gut. Within a single year, COTTI's store count surpassed 6,500 locations. By October 2024, it had broken through 10,000 stores worldwide. From the very beginning of his entrepreneurial journey, Lu Zhengyao once said, "Every competitor who has ever gone up against me, I've beaten them all." But this time, the battlefield had changed. Luckin's response was not panic, it was precision calculation. Facing COTTI's 9.9 yuan offensive, Luckin didn't blindly follow suit with across-the-board price cuts. Instead, they made a calculated move, rolling out the discount on select products only. 9.90 promotions, using the system to filter out price-sensitive users, targeting them with discount coupons, while protecting the profit margins on core products. This isn't a price war, it's a data war. Luckin's system can do something COTTI simply cannot. It knows every single user's spending habits, flavor preferences, peak activity hours, and price sensitivity. It can push a 4th cup at half-price coupon to a user who drinks 3 coconut lattes a week, while simultaneously pushing a 9.9 yuan welcome back exclusive over 5,000 coupon combinations, covering virtually every spending scenario. COTTI has the low prices, Luckin has the precision. By 2023, the competitive landscape had sharply diverged. That year, Luckin Coffee's full-year revenue reached 24.9 billion yuan, with a year-on-year increase 87.3%. What does that number actually mean? It means Luckin Coffee's annual revenue has, for the very first time, surpassed Starbucks China. That slogan, Lu Zhengyao shouted back in 2018, surpass Starbucks, after he was kicked out of his own company, was actually realized. Achieved. In 2024, Luckin Coffee kept pushing the throttle. Full-year revenue hit 34.475 billion yuan, 1.6 times what Starbucks China pulled in that same year. Door count has surpassed 22,000 locations. On July 18th, the 20,000th store opened its doors in Beijing's Zhongguancun district. Nearly 80 million monthly active users on the app. over 300 million cumulative transacting users. From its first trial store to its 20,000th location, Luckin Coffee took less than 7 years. From bankruptcy and delisting to overtaking Starbucks, it took just 3. During this period, the landscape of China's coffee market underwent a fundamental transformation. Before 2023, coffee in China was almost synonymous with Starbucks. After 2023, it became synonymous with Luckin Coffee. Per capita consumption has jumped from under 5 cups to nearly 17. Chain store penetration has broken through the 30% mark, and the market has swelled to close to 270 billion yuan. Luckin has profoundly changed the way Chinese consumers drink coffee, no longer about settling into a third place to sit and savor, but simply picking up your phone and placing an order. 9 minutes, and it's yours, no need to even head downstairs. Luckin Coffee has completely redefined how people think about this category. At the same time, new contenders have begun closing in on the coffee trek. By 2025, China saw 4 coffee brands surpassing 10,000 locations. Luckin Coffee, over 20,000. COTTI Coffee, 18,000 locations. Lucky Cup, over 10,000. And Nawa Coffee, approaching 10,000. The market has evolved from a one dominant, many weak landscape into a fierce 4-way battle at the top. But when you look at financial quality and brand perception, the gap between these 4 is far wider than the store numbers alone would suggest. And COTTI? Over the past year, approximately 50% of Luckin Coffee's newly opened stores were located within 300 meters of a COTTI coffee outlet. That's according to data from JAI. In first-tier and emerging first-tier cities, that figure climbs to over 60%. The battlefield has closed in this tight, it's a targeted hunt, and the ultimate showdown between 2 competing business logics: system versus speed. The outcome speaks for itself. By the end of 2025, COTTI Coffee had around 18,000 locations, falling short of the ambitious 50,000 stores target announced at the start of the year, with a completion rate of less than 36%. And here's the kicker: data from June 2024 shows that while COTTI opened 151 new locations, it simultaneously shuttered 152. Net growth? Exactly 0. January 31st, 2026. COTTI Coffee quietly pulled the plug on its legendary unlimited drinks for 9.9 yuan promotion. The very blade of price that once cut Luckin to the bone has finally turned and cut its own hand. Zhaoshang Securities did the math in one of their research reports. A single COTTI coffee store needs to sell an average of 400 cups per day just to break even. But in reality, most stores can only manage somewhere between 200 and 300 cups. There's a franchisee who posted on social media, "The Luckin Coffee nearby sells 300 cups a day. My shop can only manage 70 to 80, and every single one of them is delivery." As for Lu Zhengyao himself, by 2024, the total amount subject to enforcement orders against him had climbed to nearly 3 billion yuan. The man who once boasted he wins every battle, this time he lost. This clash of outcomes reflects a head-on collision between 2 fundamentally different business philosophies. Lu Zhengyao believed in what you might call the justice of speed: move fast enough, and your competitors simply can't catch up. Burn money hard enough, and the capital market will never walk away from you. This logic paid off handsomely during his UCAR days, and in Luckin's early years, it genuinely delivered expansion speeds that defied conventional wisdom. But this logic has one fatal flaw. It assumes that efficiency will naturally follow scale. Efficiency never comes naturally. Guo Jinyi's logic works in exactly the opposite way. Build efficiency first and let scale follow as a consequence, not treat scale as a prerequisite. Rather than rushing to open 20,000 stores and scrambling to fix the chaos afterward, build each location's systems to perfection first, and let efficiency naturally drive the scale. These two schools of thought went head-to-head in the market battles of 2022 through 2024, and by the end, there was no question which one had won. China's consumer industry over the past 2 decades, the playbook of scale first, fix problems later, has birthed countless miracles and left behind countless bodies. Bike sharing, fresh grocery, e-commerce, community group buying, every hot trend had someone racing to burn through cash at a breathtaking pace, racking up staggering valuations, only to come crashing down in spectacular fashion one day. Lu Zhanggao's downfall wasn't just a personal failure. It was a real-world stress test of this entire playbook, run on the coffee track, and it failed. Luckin's story was the first to clearly prove, in China's consumer goods market, that another path is possible. Systematic competitiveness can ultimately triumph over speed-driven competitiveness. This conclusion was hard-won by a company that once built its empire on lies earned through the most absurd and bewildering business journey imaginable. But this war has one final, most brilliant coda, and most people missed it. Remember Zuhu Capital? That hedge fund, the one that sent the Luckin fraud report to muddy waters, was the very hand that lit the fuse on Luckin's darkest hour. In 2022, Snow Lake Capital publicly acquired a minority stake in Luckin Coffee and released a research report, calling Luckin's comeback a miracle in Chinese business history. Those who wrote "A New Generation of Chinese Fraud Too has emerged 3 years later," voted with real money, saying, "This company is worth believing in." But the true winner of this war wasn't Guo Jinyi. It wasn't Dazhen Capital. It wasn't even the Luckin brand itself. The real winner was the system. In April 2022, Guo Jinyi once wrote, "Today marks a new beginning for Luckin Coffee." 2 years later, in December 2024, he gave a talk at the China-Europe International Business School, sharing what this fresh start company looks like today. Luckin Coffee now has over 100 million private domain users it can reach directly, over 30,000 enterprise WeChat communities processing more than 5 million orders every single day. Behind these numbers lies a single truth: Luckin is no longer a coffee company. It's a data company, only that its data happens to flow out in the form of coffee. And this conclusion has one perfect footnote. In 2023, Luckin Coffee brought in 24.9 billion yuan in revenue, just barely edging past Starbucks China. By 2024, that number had climbed to 34.4 billion, 1.6 times what Starbucks China was pulling in. But during the same period, Starbucks China saw same-store sales decline for multiple consecutive quarters. Store expansion slowed to a crawl, and CEOs came and went one after another. Even rumors have surfaced about selling off equity stakes in its China operations. There's a brand that reshaped urban consumer culture across the globe with its vision of a third place, and in China, it has met its most formidable rival yet. Not another coffee company, but rather a tech company wearing a coffee costume. Now, let's circle back to the question we started with. A brand built on lies, how did it manage to become the true king of China's coffee market? Here's the answer. The lies collapsed, but the system didn't. Luckin Coffee's Lu Zhenggao built himself a shell out of fabricated numbers. But inside that shell, there's a fully operational digital system running in real-time location algorithms, user profiling, intelligent shift scheduling, IoT device monitoring, flavor databases, dynamic pricing models. These things don't disappear just because of a founder's scandal. They keep running quietly, waiting for someone willing to use them right. Guo Jinyi is that person. He didn't invent this system, but he got one thing right. When everyone was telling him to cut the digital team, he chose to keep them. Then, the system won this war for him. And the very firm that once sent that fraud report ricocheting around the world, Snow Lake Capital, ended up becoming one of the company's most powerful champions. So the true moat has never been inside the stores. It lives in the moment. A sensor captures the flow rate of every single cup of coffee. At the moment, every flavor is translated into digital coordinates. At the moment, every coupon is precisely delivered by an algorithm. When you thought Luckin was selling coffee, it had long since become a data company. It just so happens that the data tasted exactly like coffee. Here's something I'd like to explore with you as we wrap things up. You know that feeling spending years pouring everything into something, building a team from scratch, opening a store, putting together a whole system, or just showing up to the same place, day after day, year after year? What's left behind? If one day you were gone, would that whole system still keep turning? Sometimes, it's not the person who holds the system together, it's the system that holds the person together. So all those things you've built over the years, did you truly need them, or did they need you? I'm Fanko, and I can't wait to see your answers in the comments. See you next time.